Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. I'm your host, Douglas Gabriel. I'm here with John Barnwell today, and we are going to be discussing one of the most important issues that you can possibly ever discuss: human blood. And you might notice there's an obsession with it, with people who are wealthy and the elite. And going back in time, human sacrifice and every other imaginable thing. You can't put a bigger emphasis on anything in the human body except the human heart, which is the center of that blood circulation, than to say that blood carries a very special connotation and that many people, including vampires, would like to get a hold of blood, your blood. The pharmaceutical companies would like to put things in your blood. And when it comes down to it, we have given out intelligence reports and articles showing that perception itself, the way you see the world, is written on your blood. And so there is no bigger topic. I've been studying it extensively for the last year or so, but I'm thrilled to have John Barnwell here, who started a conversation with Leo Zagami the other day about blood, bloodletting, the whole traditions of blood, and the focus and importance of blood. But I'd like for him to finish that conversation and tell us what he can, because I'm out there researching the blood. John, what can you tell us about the blood and the heart also, because you are an expert who helped prove that the heart is not a pump. We can get into that also, but what can you tell us about blood, continuing on in that vein that you had started with Leo Zagami the other day?
Well, hi, Douglas. I think the first thing that we have to address is that what is a human being is at the center of what we're trying to discuss here. And when you enter into understanding the singular nature of the blood, like it says in part 4 of Goethe's Faust, Mephistopheles says, blood is a very singular fluid. And so what does that mean? Well, in the realm in which Goethe is attempting to address, which is the challenge of being human amidst a world of temptation, then you see that Mephistopheles within Faust represents the temptation of the devil. Although in Faust there's no distinction made between the Luciferic or Satanic. They're kind of thrown in together, as it were, as Mephistopheles, the way many people deal with the issue, but that there's a very distinct separation between the Luciferic spirits that refer to the aberrations of the past, in essence, and the Ahrimanic or Satanic spirits, which tie more directly into the aberrations of the future and the future challenges of science and technology. So that when you look at the blood itself, you have to understand that it's through the warmth of the blood that the human ego, as it's called, the true human ego, is conveyed. And so in this warmth of the blood, we have a realm that's the inviolate human realm, that there's nothing deserves to enter into that realm. That's our own individual domain. And no one should have sovereignty over that. And so that ties into the vaccination narrative. And you can also bring it up into the realm of what is being dealt with in Faust, is that whole idea of this kind of a blood signing your life away in blood, like is in so many legends and so forth, that when you make a pact with the devil, he wants you to sign in blood. So you're giving something that doesn't belong inside of you entry into the most sacred domain of a human being, which is that individual ego nature in the blood.
And when I opened this, I mentioned a lot of the negative aspects of the blood, but really, how about the positive aspects of the blood? The Holy Grail, it is basically, in final analysis, not the vessel itself that's important, it's the content of the vessel. And oftentimes that is seen to be the blood of Jesus Christ or some kind of special Holy Spirit type effulgence that comes out of this grail, or all kinds of different descriptions. And as we know, the grail is probably the human heart. And so when we talk about blood and the grail, we can also literally quite specifically get into the blood relics of Jesus Christ, which is a topic that I could go on extensively about. But let's just say that the Holy Grail itself is a representation. What do they call it in Islam? The green kutab, I believe. And so this is a place where life comes to birth. And without oxygen firing the blood, as you mentioned, the warmth in the blood, without oxygen firing that blood, and without respiration firing the blood, without that warmth, we would have no existence whatsoever. And so the central place of the Holy Grail in all of this has filtered down to us in Christianity as a ritual that people no longer associate with blood sacrifice, whether it be Jesus Christ sacrificing himself for the sake of all mankind, according to what some believe, or whether it be him putting an end, as Abraham was the end to human sacrifice. Because all around that, in the Levant, previously there was human sacrifice. Throughout many ancient cultures, human sacrifice. So we saw a transition from this importance of bloodletting to really a sanctification of the blood in the heart as the Holy Grail.
I think an important issue to address is the understanding of the significance of the blood in terms of nutrition. So often today you'll read where they indicate the processes in the body that the blood is carrying the oxygen and is carrying nourishment, and it's helping remove unwanted materials from the body, waste products. That's entirely erroneous, although most people don't realize that because there's so little understanding of the lymphatic system that is essentially the waste system of the body. And so consequently, as you are eliminating waste products, they're going out through the lymphatic system. It's only in the last couple of years that modern science has come to the eureka realization that there's lymphatic system in the brain. It's really pretty astounding because obviously there's cells in the brain, they're going to have waste products, but they had always assumed that those waste products were eliminated by the blood. That's not the case. That's never the case. There's no waste removed from the blood. The blood is upbuilding and nourishment. And the only waste product that the brain or the blood associates with is the elimination of carbon dioxide. So in giving that gift to the kingdom of the plants, the carbon dioxide, we participate in our role within nature, in Celtic culture, is they would call the cauldron of Ciridwen. But that's an early image of the Grail. And the Grail itself is that meeting of the senses, the consciousness of the senses with the blood, that the blood is actually that which is participating in the observation of the sense life. And through this, there is developed a relationship to the finest mineral contents, that's the Grail feast itself. These finest mineral contents are conveyed to the pineal and pituitary gland in the brain, and that's the pinnacle of human consciousness and potential. When that becomes a developed relationship, then it's possible to be able to take this consciousness and then bring it down into the heart. And that's where the Christ consciousness arises, is through the heart. It's where the individual human being begins their journey to become sort of a human son, a being of a spirit of freedom and love. And so this is taken up as a counter image in these whole vampiric style mysteries of blood consumption and all these various perversions that we see talked about so much lately. It's absolutely astounding. When you talk about adrenochrome and other certain glandular secretions that people are so enamored with, they're fascinated by it, not knowing that that's the absolute shadow of human culture, and these are things that are a part of our distant past. You can find these types of blood rights. The American Indians thought that if you found a great opponent and you defeated him, that if you ate his heart, you would get his courage. There's other attributes that one could be achieved through eating other organs, systems in the body. All these types of things are a part of the pre-Christian experience of culture, and it's pretty near universal. There's very few cultures that didn't have that as a decadent impulse. It wasn't the initial impulse, but as mankind developed, they gained a stronger relationship with the physical world and lost a certain relationship to the spiritual world. And so more and more severe rites were being used in order to open a window into these realms. So you see these blood rites of the Vikings, or you see it in Celtic culture, you see it in Africa. There's things going on still in Africa. I was just communicated to by somebody from South Africa that was so thankful that I mentioned what's been going on in Africa, because the media is not covering it. But there's been cannibalism and human sacrifice going on through certain tribes in South Africa that's just literally going wild. They're turning the African people into prey. And so we have to pray for those people that they don't become prey of these tribes that are following backward retarded impulses. So you see at this time, at the dawning of what could possibly be an awakening, is meeting the strictest opposition, both within the archaic cultural realm with the blood rites and in the futuristic, Ahrimanic, satanic realm of technology, attempting to try and put a lid on human development and create artificial counterparts to faculties that should develop out of human development.
I'd like to pick up on a point you mentioned, and that is that the lymphatic system goes into the brain. Yes, that's a discovery that is very recent, and it shocked them to find that this was the case. But it shouldn't have been too much of a shock. But when you think about the blood, there's so much research going on right now that you cannot keep up with it whatsoever. For instance, almost every illness can be diagnosed by looking at your blood. And there are many people who work with radiesthesia who, in fact, are able to take one drop of your blood, no matter where you are. You can send it to them, and then they can work on you through subtle energy through that one drop of blood. And as you change and heal, so does the blood drop. Now, we have red blood, blue blood, and white blood, the lymphatic system, the white blood cell system. And that is something that we could focus on, because you had mentioned that through the Grail mysteries, the refined metals and minerals are taken up into the brain. And I know you happen to have studied this quite a bit. So Rudolf Steiner speaks of that. He calls it the etherization of the blood. And actually, all the ancient spiritual systems, whether it be Tibetan Buddhism or Indian Tantra, or it doesn't really matter, you're going to find that there is a system where you are going to be depositing what they say are eternal drops into your heart through a mixture of the red and the white. And it turns into pink when you have transformed it. And you can put these eternal drops in your heart. And this is the goal that you had made reference to. In fact, that Rudolf Steiner gives us the beautiful image in relationship to that to begin with, we need these metals and minerals, the refined metals and minerals that you'd find in Ormus, and perhaps you could enlighten us on that a bit too. But throughout the whole natural kingdom, Ormus is available, and those are the refined, highest metals that we find in the brain. And these metals need to be refined, humanized, transformed and deposited there so that they can have what is called hyperconnectivity, so that we can use our brain as an antenna to connect the thoughts that are behind everything that we see in the universe. So as we deposit these, some would say we deposit them, these metals and minerals, through this process if you have spiritual awakening, if you meditate, if you have the capacity to be objective, and all these different definitions we could give for it. But as you go on the path of spiritual development, there are actually elements that are transformed through the heart and turned into other elements, ionized elements, and they go into the brain. They're deposited, as you said, in the pineal gland, and they activate the pituitary gland and deposited there also. And then this transformation gives us our nourishment when we awaken, usually from sleep, or when we awaken from a deep meditation. So these metals and minerals in the brain seem to be part of that essence that we get from the Holy Grail of the heart. It's not just the warmth and the I am, the ego, the consciousness of the individual, but there is a transformation process that goes on. And this comes in through perception, and it comes in through nutrition, as you pointed out, and it comes in through spiritual nutrition, and then these things are deposited in the brain. Now, that's a spiritual picture of the transformation of the blood and the heart into what it can become as a spiritual vehicle of ascension. But if we're talking about the decadent forms of this, we would not be talking about the Grail mysteries. We would be talking about what we see in today's world. It is disturbing that the murder of innocent unborn children is now allowed, it's accepted, and it's considered vogue in the minds of the left. And throughout many parts of the world, especially the United Nations, promotes abortions everywhere. So there's abortions. There is, of course, actually sterilization going on in Africa of many of the tribes through the Bill Gates green transformation process of Africa. They are actually sterilizing people, young men and women, teenagers, by flying under the false flag of a different type of inoculation. But the point is that in the bloodstream we are transforming humans, and we're trying to, in fact, kill humans. We're trying to depopulate the world. Many people believe this is the most important thing. Wasn't it Prince Charles who said that he wants to reincarnate as a virus so that he can kill as many people on the earth as possible?
Prince Philip.
Prince Philip. Oh, Philip, that's right, I should have known.
Charming soul.
Yes, a charming soul. But I mean, these rich people actually want that, John. What is that about? Are they like carrying that over from, if you believe in reincarnation, that they were cannibals in a past life, or they were soldiers who murdered lots of people? What is the obsession for blood in our modern culture?
That's really something that's far more widespread than people think. When you start getting into what's called the Dragon Cultists, which is that ties into the houses of nobility, the dragon houses. They openly speak about the properties of blood consumption. I mean, I've been involved in groups where that's something that's just accepted, and I was like a fly on the wall. I kept my opinions to myself because I wanted to learn as much as I can. But that's something that does exist amongst the elite, is this whole idea of blood consumption. And we know of people, like Elon Musk, all that, talking about the blood serum and the properties of taking the blood serum and getting injections of it from younger people for its youth-giving properties. And there's all manner of hormonal attributes that can be equated to the blood. But the point that's most critical here is how the blood plays into the development and fostering of a wholesome development and evolution of a human being. And this is an element that escapes most people, but nonetheless, it's at the center of the Christian mystery, because at the Last Supper, Christ Jesus said to do this in memory of me, so that whenever anyone consumes their meals, if they can sanctify it, do it consciously, it can be something that can be a part of this redemptive process, rather than just unconsciously stuffing oneself. You can have a sacred relationship to having a meal, and an acknowledgement that because there is something lower, the plants or whatever you might be consuming, has made the ultimate sacrifice to nourish you, and acknowledging that and offering it up to the ultimate achievement of a human being, which is to come to the wholesome development of their individual nature. And so that's represented in the sacrifice of the blood and flesh, or the wine and bread in the sacrament of the Eucharist, that has an actual transformative effect that I've seen myself and experienced myself as healing, and also watching the effect that can have on others. The story I frequently tell is going to the Christian community and seeing a busload of mentally handicapped children show up and sit in the back of the church, and they're all twitching and waving their arms around, and they can't sit still for a minute until the service gets to the point of the Eucharist, where the consecration of the human takes place. And when that event takes place within the service, they all become still and stare reverently at the bread and wine.
So true. I've seen that myself along with you, and we've seen that those type of services bring incredible comfort and nourishment to people, literally spiritual nourishment. And that is exactly what the body and the blood is. The bread and the wine is an image that we could take from the Greeks, would help us elucidate what the body and blood really are. The body and blood of Jesus transforming bread and wine into this spiritual food, this spiritual nourishment. The Greeks believed, and you can correct me on this, Ichor. How do you pronounce that? Ichor or Ichor?
Ichor.
Ichor. So Ichor was the blood of the gods. And when Zeus would mate with female humans, human that would be born from that would have half blood of humans, half blood of the gods. So that they had the Ichor of the gods, the blood of the gods. This is what Hercules had. And once Hercules went through these transformations, was raised because of the ichor in the blood into an eternal place in the stars. That's the highest you can get. Well, the gods had to keep drinking the nectar and eating the ambrosia so that they could remain in the heavens as eternal gods. With the Norse, it was the apples of Iduna. With also the apples of the Hesperides, the golden, oftentimes golden apples are considered. And it's oftentimes the female lineage that protects them, the matrilineal protection of this food of the gods. As a matter of fact, it's oftentimes a female who has to distribute it to the gods and goddesses so that they can have this. But the point is, in almost every single mythology and religion that I know of that you look closely, you're going to find bread and wine. You're going to find ambrosia and nectar. You're going to find the dew of heaven with the amrita. There are many, many, many names for this. But the point is exactly what we're talking about here. It's through the blood that you can have spiritual nourishment. And through the blood, you can give a spiritual nourishment to the beings above you, and then they can turn around and give you spiritual nourishment as a consequence of that. And that is a transformation process that the ancient clairvoyants could see. And when they looked at the human being, they could see that the heart was the sun of the human being's own solar system, and that the blood reached all the way out to the periphery of the human body, which was really, when you move the arms and legs, you create a sphere. It's the sphere of the stars. And so they could see what was actually happening here. And so when they give us these descriptions of the ancients, when you read these, you are actually getting what was at that time happening. And so they could look into this and they could say the human heart is the doorway to the spiritual world. And if you're evil, you want to steal it. And the younger you can steal it, the younger that child is, the closer they are still to the spiritual world they came from. It seems as if the more the evil ones want to steal it, even to literally the child in the womb. And of course, pedophilia. And then the human sacrifices, it was often the children that they gave up. And this was only a few thousand years ago that it was extremely common. So there must have been a reason, and the reason is the ancient clairvoyants could see that there was a, literally, you could describe it in many ways, but a spiritual fire, you could call it, in the blood and in the heart. And this is the reason that they would like to steal that spiritual fire, because they believe it gives them power. And this is the type of evil that led into Rabbi Zevi and led into what we can see coming even into the modern world. You were describing some of these to me earlier, of people who actually believe it's okay to kill others and to drink their blood or take their blood when it's warm or steal their blood in some way, some type of ritualistic power ceremony. And as we know, this is certainly the rituals of, say, the Toltecs or the certain Mexican mysteries had blood running down the steps from the top of the pyramid to the bottom. And this was part of what they believed was a spiritual act, but in fact they were servicing spirits of a darker nature. And so we can see this coming into modern age, even in the Bohemian Grove. Who do they worship? Moloch, who is the god that was given children as human sacrifices. And this was going on just, actually in human history not long ago. So we need to understand that it is consciousness, it is the spirit fire that they're going after, and it is because they are evil that they know that this is true, and they've been carrying on these rituals for a long, long time, and they may not understand it consciously, but that is behind why you see so many of them taking not only just stem cells, but literally babies' blood, babies' living brains, babies' beating hearts. And this is what they pay the most money for when they literally, I'm sorry to have to say this, but they chop up the child at Planned Parenthood and they sell it. And you can go to the sites that we've shown you to see that this is true. It's not made up. You can also understand that there are many people who believe that Kuru, either drinking blood or eating human flesh as a cannibal, is actually their religion. It's what they believe. And as twisted as that may be, when you see that it is nothing more than twisting the light, the fire of the heart and the blood, into the darkness of the demonic rituals, I can only feel sorry for those people, and we can pray and we can work as hard as we can to make sure that this type of thing comes to an end.
Well, you see that at this period of transition, they're coming out of the shadows. I mean, how can they treat pedophilia as a sexual preference? Like you're just, that it's like okay. That's like absolutely absurd. So that we've entered into an era of falsehood. And there are many ideas around that are going to challenge individuals to be able to find some kind of moral fiber to live within, because other than that, secular culture gives them nothing but moral turpitude, you call it. That it's basically a swamp, that you're allowing yourself to succumb to the lower forces. There's the dragon that rises up out of the swamp, and then there's the dove that descends from above. But the proper mingling between these two streams, the vital pole from below upwards with the consciousness pole, the dove from above, is the central task. And the proper way to do it is through consciousness, not through the taking of substances, drugs and blood, or all manner of things people have been getting involved in. Taking ayahuasca can bring you into interdimensional experience of other beings of a lower order that are very intelligent beings, but they're nonetheless of a lower order. And eventually, at some point, you get to where these beings want something in return. And that's how these rites show up. I mean, you can go and you could study the Mexican mysteries, the history of the Mexican mysteries, the accounts of the Spanish. There's accounts from Spanish priests that relate that there were, in one festival, 30,000 people sacrificed. I mean, it's unbelievable. So that you have to look at these things it's as something that should remain where it is, which is in the past. That through the sacrifice of Christ, these things became no longer necessary.
There are so many mysteries in relationship to blood. One of the ones that I have discovered recently, which I always thought was simply mythology or legend, was blood rain. And one can imagine how the ancients might really believe that blood comes from the gods, blood comes from the skies, once you find out that there have been over 70 documented cases of blood rain. And in most cases, they saw a spear-like meteor flash through the sky or a comet. And then right after that, it would rain blood, literally rain blood. Now, you're going to say, oh, that's an analogy, or it was red water or what? Nope. In 2012, we had the great occurrence that in Kerala, India, 10,000 tons of this fell from the sky after a large meteor had lit up the sky and crashed. So they tested it. And what did they find out? It's got hemoglobin in it. It's almost the same exact substance as human blood. And so they said, well, this can't be. It must have been in the atmosphere, or is it possible that blood is such a special spiritual substance that it came to Earth through a celestial cosmic event? This is sheer speculation, of course, but the point is that if the ancients looked up and they saw a fiery spear falling from the sky, and then it rained blood, and sometimes the blood would burn their skin and ruin everything that it fell on. Other times it didn't. But this was quite common, and they would see it as a tremendous celestial sign. So you have a spear, a fiery spear, and then blood comes after it. And then they would catch some of this because they actually used it for medicinal purposes, unless it was the poisonous version, and it was clearly one or the other, which they would use, of course, for ill purposes, evil. Well, this is the exact image that we have in the procession of the Holy Grail. You have a spear that is a bright light is coming off of it, enters into the room, a chalice enters into the room with a bright light coming off of it, and above it is a spear which is dripping blood from the tip. So is the image of the procession of the Holy Grail a message that there were cosmic events that the ancients were trying to tell us about? Or shall we take it a step further and say that literally that blood is the blood of the ichor blood spoken of by the Greeks, and it came from the sky? And isn't it interesting that Zeus threw thunderbolts and Odin had a spear that couldn't miss? And you have these images that arise again and again, and then you have Longinus at the side of Christ, piercing the side of Christ so that the blood can enter into the earth and be caught by Joseph of Arimathea in the Grail. So my point here is, whether you want to use the Catholic ritual, the Christian ritual of the Holy Eucharist, or whether you want to follow the Holy Grail, or whether you want to believe in blood rain as an actual real source of a religious mythological image, whether you want to believe that we're all partially divine and we have ichor in our blood, or that it's the blood of Christ that has transformed your blood, many ways to look at this. But remember that your blood is sacred, and you should make sure that no one puts anything in it that you don't know what it is. And this is a battlefield for the spirit at this point. What you put in your body for nutrition and what you put into your bloodstream, whether it be drugs or injections, these are the things that can determine whether or not you're going to spiritually advance and whether or not you're going to deposit those minerals that John talked about in the pineal gland that had everything to do with ascension and higher consciousness. So the blood is, in fact, a mysterious thing to study. It is a mystery unto itself. I actually give it the name, the mysteries of blood, or the blood mysteries. And matter of fact, I just wrote a book on it, but it also included the feminine nature in relationship to the Grail and the blood relics of Jesus Christ, and the way that the Spanish queens and the French queens protected those blood relics of Jesus of Nazareth. And it was always the women that protected those blood relics because they understood the blood mysteries of menstruation, of the moon, of birth. And with those mysteries of blood, they were able to basically keep this wisdom alive until today. We have wise women, midwives, who have life and death in their hands, and it is all a manifestation of the mysteries of the blood.